Tyler Holman is a PhD student studying Roman art at Emory University. His research focuses on Roman Egypt, including material culture and numismatics, and he has a special interest in interconnections between the ancient Greco-Roman world, Africa, and Asia.
What I wanted to talk to you about today is less focused on a specific type of coinage, more so a broader phenomenon, just to prepare you for what's to come. So punch-marked silver coins, like the ones on the top left and the bottom right of the slide, are actually the most widespread artistic product of the Mauryan dynasty, which ruled much of the Indian subcontinent between 322 and 185 BCE. Yep, one thing I've noticed about that is that we actually see a relative neglect of the study of the iconography on these coins in our quest to better understand the monetary system, which is quite mysterious in a lot of ways. Some of the designs can be perceived as rather crude and difficult to interpret, but these symbols actually have clear parallels in other works of art sometimes. And it's my hope that by drawing attention to those parallels, we can shed some light on not only on the coins, but also the broader historical context in which they were produced. So an almost overwhelming array of symbols appear on these coins between the introduction of the type under the kings of Magadha, the Janapada, during the 5th century BCE, and the end of the series in the 2nd century BCE, or late, 2nd century BCE. Over 600 different symbols are recorded in punch-mark coinage of the Indian subcontinent, the authoritative catalog of these coins by P.L. Gupta and T.R. Hardikar. Only two, the sun and six-armed symbol, appear consistently on most coins of the series, though, and these long-standing symbols have thus been interpreted by many scholars to be symbols of the Magadha or Mauryan state. The distinguishing characteristic of the last major series of these coins, dubbed Series 7 by Gupta and Hardikar, is the absence of these two symbols, though, which are replaced by two versions of what I'm calling the three-figure symbol. The disappearance of these enduring symbols has been interpreted as evidence that these coins were being produced by a non-Mauryan authority. Gupta and Hardikar did not agree with that idea and postulated a relationship between Series 6, which does have the traditional symbols, and Series 7, which they dated to the time of Ashoka and his successors. However, Robert Tighe's analysis of hoard data has subsequently made a strong case that Series 7 coins, in fact, do postdate Series 6. And my own analysis, which was published in the Journal of the ONS, number 239, under the title Countermarks Derived from the Magadha Series 7 Punchmark Coinage, which was under Pankaj's tenure as editor, has demonstrated that the Series 7 symbols were also being applied as countermarks to coins that were already in circulation on their reverse side. And you can see an example of that, a significantly earlier coin that's been stamped with that mark. These two facts do suggest to me that they were being produced of an independent authority, and Tighe suggests that they likely come from the northwestern region of the subcontinent. In today's presentation, I want to place this series in the broader socio-political context at the end of the Mauryan dynasty, during the late 3rd century BCE, before turning to the symbolism of the marks themselves. I'm going to postulate that they were closely linked to religious change that was happening in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent during the late and post-Mauryan period, specifically the emergence of the Proto-Vaishnava Bhagavata religion, otherwise known as the cult of the Vrishni heroes. My use of the term Northwest here refers to something vaguely like the circled area we see on this map, although it's often difficult to tie some of these specific coin issues to specific regions or cities. As demonstrated by the historian Romila Thapar in her work, Ashoka and the Decline of the Mauryas, there appears to have been a gradual decline and disintegration of the Mauryan dynasty's central authority following the reign of Ashoka, which ends around 232 BCE. In fact, epigraphic evidence shows that Mauryan governors and vassals were already wielding a significant degree of autonomy under Ashoka and his predecessors. So the Junagadh rock inscription near Girnar describes how the provincial governor Vaishya Pushagupta under Chandragupta Maurya, the founder of the Mauryan dynasty, ordered the construction of a major reservoir. This would have been a monumental undertaking, yet the actual construction of this is credited primarily to the subordinate governor, not Chandragupta himself. Similarly, the inscription goes on to describe how the Yavana or Greek king Tushafa, while governing, had ordered the reservoir with conduits for Ashoka the Maurya. Again, the text implies that the Mauryan governors directed a great deal of the administration and bureaucracy of the local government and had the power to raise significant manpower. After the death of Ashoka, outlying regions increasingly asserted that autonomy. A variety of epigraphic evidence suggests the rise of several small polities in former Mauryan territories around the end of the 3rd century BCE, while Ashoka's descendants are still reigning in Pataliputra in the east. However, even as the empire disintegrated and long after its fall, Mauryan symbolism and identity sometimes maintained significant legitimacy and cachet. And many rulers sought to use that to their own advantage by claiming genealogical or political links with the Mauryan dynasty. Clear examples of this occur as early as circa 157 through 149 BCE, when a former Mauryan minister used his dynastic links to proclaim the independence of the Vidarbha region and install his brother-in-law as king of the new state. Such claims remain meaningful as late as the 7th century CE, when the Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang encountered a Buddhist king of Magadha called Purnavarman, who claimed to be, quote, the last descendant of King Ashoka. Ancient India did not have a strong tradition of historical writing, according to Thapar, so the collective memory of the Mauryans must have been kept alive through oral and visual tradition. Coins that carried symbols strongly associated with the dynasty and earlier Magadhan rulers are tangible evidence of these traditions, helping to fill the gap between the time of Ashoka and Xuanzang. Regional bronze coins produced during the post-Mauryan period gradually evolve away from the Mauryan monetary weight and fineness standards, but they continue to depict traditional symbols that had originally been found on the Mauryan coins. Far more than the three I'm showing you here are known to exist. And you'll see that I've circled in each case the so-called six-armed symbol that's characteristic of Magadha Mauryan coinage appearing on these issues. Even though we know virtually nothing about the administration or ideology of a lot of the cities or states that are producing these coins, and it's often difficult to agree on even where they're issued from, we can still say something about them, I think, by the iconography they're putting on their coins. These traditional symbols are clearly continuing to be meaningful, and they're being incorporated here to signify some type of legitimacy of the state or reliability of its currency. I would argue that by the post-Mauryan period, the production of coinage had become an obligation of legitimate government, and the symbols that appeared on coins expressed the identity, beliefs, and authority of the issuing power. In contrast to this continued use of Mauryan coinage, the absence of these traditional symbols on the Series 7 coins, which otherwise do actually conform to the Mauryan monetary standards, implies that while the authority that produced those coins maintained a significant degree of continuity with the Magadhan administrative infrastructure, it made no attempt to assert any political or symbolic continuity with the Mauryan dynasty, the way that some local currencies seem to. So the adoption of the new symbols, the three-figure symbol, for instance, is breaking with centuries of continuity. That they're superseding it even with that authority by countermarking already circulating currency with their own new symbols. Understanding the symbolism of that three-figure symbol that appears on the Series 7 coins is important because that may suggest some information about the authorities that issued them. Even if the marks are primarily functioning as some sort of fiscal regulation system that's only understood by money changers and mint workers, that doesn't necessarily preclude them from also having a symbolic function. Mints might have been free to select their own marks for self-representation, and perhaps sometimes they selected images of popular local deities that could have been understood separately from their role as part of any broader system of fiscal authentication or administration. So literary and epigraphic evidence suggests already how such a scenario might have played out around Kabul in modern Afghanistan. By around 206 BCE, the Greek historian Polybius says the city is being ruled by someone he refers to as the king of the Indians, called Sophogosenus. The extent of Sophogosenus's territory is unclear, and there are no other historical references to him. And there's no evidence either to tie him specifically to the Series 7 coins, other than Ty's attribution of those coins to the broader northwestern regions. Nevertheless, the existence of a ruler like this demonstrates that independent states are already being formed while Ashoka's descendants are still reigning in the east. And an independent polity in the northwest might not have wanted to tie itself to the Mauryan dynasty to claim legitimacy. We already have inscriptions in the reign of Ashoka that give the impression of the area as being sort of liminal or less under the control of the central dynasty. People maintain distinct ethnic, linguistic, and religious identities, and that's mentioned on some of Ashoka's inscriptions. And an independent ruler there might have found it easier to assert his legitimacy by bringing an emphasis to these local identities and deities rather than linking himself to the Mauryans. So some sort of local political identity must have been evident in these new symbols. They clearly had to have meant something, but what was it? I want to suggest that they can be linked to the emerging religious movement that's variously termed the Bhagavata religion or the cult of the Vrishni heroes, which really is part of the emergence of modern Hinduism in some ways. Their use here may have been accompanied and complemented a wider program of state-sponsored reform. Now, we typically understand the Mauryan period itself as being an important time of religious change, given Ashoka's patronage of Buddhism, but we shouldn't underestimate the degree of change that happens in its wake either. So this was the beginning of what some historians refer to as the Hindu synthesis, when the Vedic religious practices began to develop into something that does more closely resemble modern Hinduism in some ways. It doesn't mark the end of Vedic ritual, but it changes it. So this new spirituality is emphasizing giving devotional honor or bhakti to deities through participatory rituals and bloodless offerings, rather than purely following the traditional Vedic animal sacrifice practices. Devotion to a particular deity or group of deities above others arose on regional and sectarian bases. And it's clear that their preferences could be influenced by the patronage of local rulers who were broadcasting their loyalties through inscriptions, monuments, and I argue coins. The early Bhagavata religion worshipped members of the legendary Vrishni clan that originated around Mathura. It's likely coming from an amalgamation of many traditions, legends, and historical memories, and gets crystallized and theologically refined in later texts like the Mahabharata. Members of the Vrishni clan include Vasudeva Krishna, whose cult eventually dominates those of his relatives, but also his brother Samkarshana Balarama, an agricultural deity, is also very significant, especially early on, as is their sister, the goddess Eknamasha. Bhagavata devotion certainly benefited from the support of some minor rulers who came to power after the decline of the Mauryans, as demonstrated by epigraphic evidence. At Hathibada Gosundi, there's an inscription erected by Sarvatada, an otherwise unattested local ruler in the 2nd or 1st century BCE, celebrating his construction of a shrine to the Vrishni deities, and specifically Balarama and Krishna. The king is identified even as a devotee of Bhagavat in that inscription. And at Morawell, a different inscription is dedicated by Sodasa, the son of the Indo-Scythian satrap Rajavula, and is dated to the very, very early part of the 1st century CE, proclaiming his construction of a, quote, stone shrine to house stone images of the holy heroes of the Vrishni. Now, we have no images found to accompany these inscriptions, so we don't know exactly what those would have looked like. And images themselves tend not to actually be inscribed, which creates an issue with identifying exactly what they represent. But among those representations that have been identified with some consensus as Bhagavata images, so-called kinship triads depicting Krishna, Balarama, and Ekanamsha are most well known. But little effort has been made to try to tie those to the Series 7 punchmark coinage, even though there have been some casual identifications proposed in the past. In general, I think there's a clear trend to be seen throughout the Mauryan period towards the more frequent representation of human figures on coins that corresponds to the growing popularity of personified deities, in contrast with the more aniconic tradition that dominated earlier periods. The earliest human figures with identifiable attributes actually appear in Gupta and Hardacre's series 5A, which they date to the reign of Chandragupta, and such figures appear with increasing frequency on subsequent issues. I don't think these represent human individuals simply because there is no strong tradition of personal portraiture, numismatic or otherwise, in India until the spread of Greek influence. So a good case can be made that several of these figures depicted on punchmark coins are related to the Vrishni cult. So this figure, portrayed on Gupta and Hardacre's mark 362, demonstrates great similarity in pose and attributes to the central figure we have represented on this rock painting of the Vrishni triad found at Tikla in Madhya Pradesh, dating to the late 3rd to early 2nd century BCE. Both the coin figure and the painted figure are shown holding the same distinctive objects, a wheel and a sword or mace, which are both common attributes of early Krishna images. This iconography is in turn very similar to the right-hand figure that we have represented here in a duo consisting of Krishna and Balarama depicted in a rock painting at Chilas in modern Pakistan, which is dated to the 1st centuries BC or CE. In this case, the figure is accompanied by an inscription that specifically identifies it as Krishna, so it's not ambiguous at all. And I think that the most reasonable explanation that we can make is simply that the coin images that follow these prototypes also represent the same figure, that is Vasudeva or Krishna. A similar case can be made for two figures portrayed on Gupta and Hardacre's symbol 362 and 363. 362 depicts a standing figure holding an elongated object similar to that, while 363 shows a standing figure holding one or more elongated objects, not unlike the figure of Balarama that we have at Chilas. These figures, and at Tikla as well. These figures in turn bear a resemblance to Gupta and Hardacre's symbol 561 from the Post-Mauryan Series 8 coins, which they date to the mid-2nd century BCE and is represented on the far right. I think this identification is actually essentially proven by the shape of this instrument that's held by the figure on the left of mark 561 and by the lone figure on 560 or 363 rather. It has this distinctive S shape that's identical to the shape of the plow or hala seen in early depictions of Balarama, including the Tikla one. It's a very distinctive shape, I think. These identifications are relevant to the discussion of the Series 7 coins because I want to propose that this 3-figure mark, as you may have guessed, should be identified as a Vrishni triad. As we see here, probably meant to depict Balarama, Krishna, and Ekanamsha. While the punchmark symbols lack enough recognizable attributes to identify them with certainty, I think my identification is supported by comparison to known Vrishni triads in other media. There's the general composition showing the 3 figures facing forward, standing close together, and both varieties seem to portray these really elaborate head adornments on the figures, a characteristic that can also be observed in other Vrishni kingship triads. On the cruder style Series 7 coins, it's sort of these dots represented around the heads of the figures. And on the finer style, we have these top knots worn by the left and central figure and 2 long strands of hair or fillets worn by the rightmost figure. And there's also this akimbo pose where the hand is being put on the hip and the elbow is flexed. So that's common in early Indian sculpture, including Vrishni kinship triads. And its presence here maybe suggests that the mark itself is imitating a sculpture or painting in other media. And there's one final key piece of evidence, I think, for the prevalence of the Vrishni cult in the Northwest in my identification. And that's the appearance of Balarama and Vasudeva Krishna on the Greek king Agathocles' Indian-issued coins. These coins highlight a desire to demonstrate the foreign ruler's legitimacy by tying him to these indigenous cults. And that clearly must indicate that these are popular deities in the region already by this point. While also influenced by Hellenistic art, the iconography is still similar to other Vrishni images. We have the same attributes with that distinctive S-shaped plow in the case of Balarama on the left bottom image of the slide, and the sword and wheel in the case of Krishna on the right. They're clearly drawn from earlier precedents, while both figures are surmounted with characteristically elaborate headdresses or parasols. And these coins are produced only a few decades after the Series 7 punchmark coins, probably around 185 BCE, by which time the Indian states in that region are being taken over by expansionist Greek kings coming down from Bactria. In conclusion, it's admittedly difficult to definitively identify the figures depicted on the Series 7 three-figure mark, but my broader thesis that these symbols reflect religious change and the emergence of an independent state during the waning period of the Mauryan dynasty still stands, I think, regardless of the precise identification of the figures. Not enough has been done to bring ancient Indian numismatics into conversation with these religious developments. Since coins frequently portray religious images, it should be expected that these developments would be reflected in the numismatic record. The punchmark coinage represents a valuable and really untapped resource for the study of art and religion in ancient India. And I think the definitive identification of Vrishni figures in earlier series of punchmark coins that I've shown, dating back as far as Chandragupta, opens the door to a more complex understanding of popular religion during the Mauryan period, and kind of anticipates the coming Hindu synthesis that happens in the post-Mauryan period. So that's the end of my presentation, and I hope you find that interesting and at least somewhat easy to follow. I know there's a lot of data being presented, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Tyler. It was a great talk. It's